Good evening. It is Friday, April the 13th, about 10:30 p.m. This is Shay Gibson, the Sail Flow, bringing you another forecast for the Charleston Race Week. This one will cover Saturday and Sunday. We'll talk about the severe threat on Sunday here in just a little bit. Let's take a look at the local radar. Things are pretty quiet along the southeast coast in the mid-60s for lows. We see the thunderstorm activity out to the west starting to come together ahead of the cold front. This is going to be slowly approaching the region and actually traversing the area Sunday, late Sunday afternoon into Sunday evening and overnight. So we're expecting severe weather to become part of the forecast as we head into Sunday. But for right now, like I said, pretty quiet. We'll go ahead and move that off the screen. Take a look at sail flow, and we see the winds right now 8 to 12 or 8 to 10 knots, gusting to 12. We saw those offshore values today. I was actually in the race today, and boy, I tell you, it was pretty tough to get some wind on the outside, especially through the jetties and on the outside of the jetties. We only had about 2 to 6 knots, 6 knots tops, and made for a pretty long trek. But just as you got inside the harbor where we talked about downwind of these land masses, we saw the winds really cranking back up by the time we got back in, just to the basically to the north of Fort Sumter and all the way out into this area. We saw the winds really cranking up. I think we saw 18 knots at some point. The apparent winds were reaching up to 21 knots, and you could really feel it in this area in the thermal mixing zone. So again, tomorrow we'll be able to see that same effect. I think the winds on the outside might be a couple of knots higher than they were today, just simply because we have the cold front lining up, the high pressure, the sea breeze intensity is going to come up a little bit more. We'll go ahead and look at the GFS model, the initialization period for right now. This is from tropicaltidbits.com. And that was the thing that we had for the offshore today, was this ridge axis still extended into the coastline. So all these values along the coast were very weak, especially over those cooler, more stable shelf waters where the water temperatures are about 62 to 63 degrees. Just could not get a good thermal mix out there. It only happened inland over land. So if we take a look, we'll go ahead and run the model forward a little bit, and we see that things for tomorrow line up a little bit better. This is getting into tomorrow afternoon, where that ridge axis is still right about here, but it's starting to sort of straighten out or fade out. You can see the isobars lining up a little bit more vertical ahead of this storm line out here, and that means the winds are going to be a little bit more south tomorrow, and they're going to start to maybe increase by a couple of knots more than today. I think we talked about that the other night, that the winds would increase slowly each day and then building to the big peak on Sunday. Speaking of Sunday, we run this model out and we get into Sunday afternoon, and this is when it starts to get messy. So a lot of this prefrontal moisture may arrive here. We may even see a few passing showers early in the morning along the warm air inversion, and then clearing out, and then we get a little bit of sunshine and stability starting to build. We get low-level jetting ahead of this, and so that's one thing that's going to bring the winds up on Sunday. First, let me take a quick look at the Stormline build. This actually gets into Sunday night when the front is going to be pushing through, so the timing has been pushed back a couple of hours, which means the severe threat may be held off until late in the afternoon Sunday into Sunday evening, which is a good thing for the race because you'll be able to have the races without fear of any severe weather approaching the area. Here's the 10 meter wind forecast. You can see the crease in the atmosphere with the cold front coming through, but you can see the wind barbs lining up and getting a little bit stronger, the stronger offshore gradient pushing into the coast ahead of that front. If we look at the SPC convective outlook, here's for Sunday. We're in the slight zone, so that doesn't mean we're not totally void of possibly seeing a tornado. That would probably happen a little bit more inland. I think we're more concerned with straight line winds associated with those thunderstorms, maybe some hail. So damaging winds and hail will be the main things here that we're looking for. If we do see some rotation or some radar indicated tornadoes, that more likely will happen inland because the cooler shelf waters tend to stave off those storms right along the immediate coast. Here's a better graphic of that from the National Weather Service on Facebook earlier, and they're saying just to be prepared. Go ahead and get a plan and make sure that you have everything tied down. If your boat's going to be on the water, be prepared for some pretty strong winds and some severe weather to accompany that. When we start to look at the low-level jets, and I'm going to get into a little bit of the science behind what we're talking about as far as Sunday goes. Now, the forecast is really going to depend on low-level jetting ahead of the front, also some sea breeze coupling, and also we have to factor in marine layers. So again, along the immediate coast, the beaches, barrier islands, those zones will remain lower. They'll be capped probably in the low teens. We might see some mid-teens if we get enough forcing to the surface, but we start to talk about low-level jetting. I like to look at about 3,000 feet, and I'm going to run this forward. When we see the oranges and the yellows and oranges over here, these are starting to bring winds up to 40, 50 knots. The magic number for us to get the beaches to about 15 to 20 knots is about 40 or 45 knots at this level. Anything more than that, I mean, we're already talking 20 knots plus inside the harbor at this point. And as we get closer into time, we start to look at Sunday. We're going back to Sunday afternoon about 1 o'clock p.m. We're starting to see the low-level jettings really reach into the area. So we're getting about 45 knots right here just north of Savannah where this wind barb is. Whoop, I think that just resets. So let me go ahead and run this back forward again for Sunday afternoon. We're running about 35 to 45 knots, mainly 45 knots in those low-level jets from what I can see in this map. This is aviation ads product. And so when we talk about that, we look inside the harbor at those thermal zones, and we'll go back to sail flow for that. And when you get a strong enough wind like that, especially from the south-southwest or even southwest coming across this warmer land, it sort of really comes down over these cooler waters inside the harbor, and then you get a really strong wind here. In fact, inland, you get even stronger winds. So we may be gusting into the mid-30s inland near the airport. We may be getting averages about 25 knots, 20 to 25 knots inside the harbor with gusts over 30. So we could be talking in the 35 mile per hour range by the time we round the peak heating hours between 12 and about 3 o'clock p.m. So winds are going to progressively become stronger and stronger. In fact, the morning time, we may even see the nocturnal jet still going on off the inversion in the morning. So we may already have a southwest flow or south-southwest flow starting in the mid-teens and then backing down a few knots and then really surging back up in the afternoon. So that's the tricky thing about cold fronts this time of the year, is we tend to see the inland locales and these thermal zones really taking off and getting this really higher gusts. So it can get pretty punchy out there. So I guess in a nutshell for tomorrow, for Saturday, I'm going to call about 9 to 13 knots along the immediate coast, and we may stick down a little bit lower, 8 to 12. I think offshore we definitely have a possibility to have a couple more knots, especially right through the jetties out here. We may be able to get somewhere between 5 and 9 knots tomorrow versus the 2 to 4 or 2 to 5 that we had today. So still single digits, staying just below 10 knots. I'd be surprised to get over 10 knots, but as we get closer to Fort Sumter, we do start to see that 10 knot threshold. And then as we get downwind of the landmass, of course, we're looking at upper teens for tomorrow. We did hit 18 knots today, which is a couple of knots over the higher threshold I had. And so we may be able to hit 17, and I'm going to go ahead and push 17 to 21 knots just to leave that cushion for the average to reach into the 20 to 21 knot range. And then we get gusts and possibly even to the mid-20s by mid to late afternoon. So we're talking between like 2 and 5 p.m. is when these peak values are going to be hitting, just like from today. We'll have a very similar day to tomorrow, but add a couple of knots to the entire forecast. And again, Sunday, be very watchful. The models are going to be jumpy, and if we go ahead and take a quick look at those, I don't spend too much time. But if we look at Sunday's models, we see there's a lot of agreement. There's a little bit of disagreement on the actual direction of the south wind, so there's a variable field there. But we see the winds really jump up after dark, and then they start to come up sometime late morning. A lot of these models start to come up into the mid-teens on a south wind, and there may be some variable south-southeasterlies in there as well. But the speeds in general are going to be on the up and up throughout the whole day. And coupled with those low-level jets and sea breezing, any pockets of sunshine, if we keep sunshine along the coast and just keep that prefrontal moisture away, that'll add even more instability, more winds to it all. So that's going to be pretty much primarily the wind forecast. We take a quick look at sea surface temperatures. And let me go ahead and activate that. I think we're still at about 63 degrees. We'll go ahead and show that right there. We'll go ahead and add this one. And we're about 64 degrees on the sea surface temperature. So as those sea surface temperatures come up in time, so will the winds along the immediate coast and barrier islands. But for right now, we're going to keep the higher winds inside the harbor, just like for today. And that's going to do it for this wind forecast. So good luck out there again tomorrow. And I'll be back on tomorrow to talk about Sunday in a little bit more detail, especially with the severe threat, which I think is going to hold off till later. The only thing we need to watch for is a little bit of rain ahead of it. So until tomorrow, take care, good luck tomorrow, and have fun.